Please welcome Professor Suzan Oelofse, the Principal Scientist of CSIR.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. I sincerely hope that what I have to share with you today will be of some interest to you and will be definitely in line with the Deputy DG's notion of evidence-based decision-making. So the presentation today is around modelling South Africa's approach to near-zero plastics leakage to our oceans. And perhaps just before I start, a quick breakdown of what I'm going to discuss. First of all, why we are looking at modelling plastics to the ocean. Then the Breaking the Plastic Wave study that was done. It's an international study. And then applying that plastics model, the P2O model, in the South African context. I was hoping to give you a lot of results today, but unfortunately, the model is still being tested, and therefore the results that I have to show to you is not quite what I was hoping for. But I can share with you the struggles that we had with the data collection and the verification, and I can share some preliminary results. But we first just want to show those results also to some of our stakeholders who provided input to make sure that we are comfortable with what the model is turning out, and then some conclusions on that. So if we then look at the background, why is plastics to the oceans an issue? It is estimated that $3.7 trillion is the lifetime cost to society, the environment and the economy of plastics that has been produced since in 2019. And that is statistics coming from a WWF study. And they estimate that $7.1 trillion will be the cost in 2040 if we don't take any action around reducing the plastic leakage. And that's a significant amount. It's more than double what we currently see as the 2019 figures. Then another quite shocking statistic, which fortunately has been changed recently, is that South Africa is the 11th worst plastic polluter in absolute terms. Consequent studies have shown that we are not quite as bad, but it still rings true that a lot of plastics leak into the environment and needs to be addressed. And then the last bit on this slide is South Africa has adopted the Global Plastics Pollution Treaty earlier this year, and as a result, there are certain commitments. First of all, it requires that we address the entire life cycle of plastics. Also, the goal is to move to a circular economy, and then it is a legally binding mechanism for countries to work together towards a solution, and also for countries in the end to be held accountable if they don't meet the targets that are set. So if we then look at the Breaking the Plastic Wave study, this study was a global study, and it looked at plastics, and basically the reason for this study was not so many years ago, but there has been a flurry of photos of marine animals being entangled in plastics in the ocean, and therefore it has raised a lot of concern throughout the world. And therefore, the study then tries to estimate what the actual mechanisms are that one can use and implement to reduce plastic leakage. So there's currently a lack of evidence-based roadmap to describe the pathways to foster convergent action globally. And therefore, the Pew Charitable Trust, in partnership with Systemic, created a model of the plastic system to try and see where where the plastics are moving and where it ends in the end. So the results then suggest that there are an evidence-based, comprehensive, integrated, and economically attractive pathway to reduce plastics leaking into the ocean. And the findings from the Breaking the Plastic Wave study was published in a peer-reviewed journal, Science. That is the journal to publish in if you are a scientist. And that publication appeared on the 23rd of July in 2020. And basically, they have identified 4 levers of change. and modeled those: reduction, substitution, recycling, and proper disposal. And we thought, therefore, that when the Pew Trust people started looking for a country to test the model at country level, that we will put up our hands and say, but let's try it out in South Africa and see if we can indeed inform policy decisions through evidence, as is the suggestion by the model. So some of the key findings, just from the global study, is that if we do nothing, business as usual into the future, then the annual inflows into the oceans will nearly triple by 2040. Currently, there are some commitments by industry, so they also modeled then what will happen if we meet all those industry commitments. And even then, we see that we will reduce the business as usual scenario by 7%, but still increase the leakage by 147% into the oceans. So that is quite significant. But then I think the most important finding is if we look at addressing this issue, we actually require a systemic change. We need to apply a robust investment in all technologies and management practices and policy approaches throughout the value chain if we want to make a difference. And in 20 years, there would be about 80% reduction from the current trajectory that we are on. So the new solutions would then provide consumers with the same service that plastics delivers today, but at a lower cost to society. And the pictures there on the slide is just the business as usual scenario, and the bottom one is in case we manage to do the system change. There you can see where we currently sit with a 29. At the bottom, it can reduce to 5, which is quite significant. But that is in the ideal world if we apply all those possible measures. Then if you look at this slide, it specifically looks at what the trajectory would look like under different scenarios. Right at the top, the business as usual. You can see we are on a trajectory to have increasing pollution into the oceans. The next one, the dotted line, is the current commitments. As I said, it will give us about a 7% reduction from the business as usual. If we can increase recycling, then it looks a lot better. If we further reduce and substitute the plastics with other materials, then it will even have a greater effect. And if we collect and dispose of our waste properly, then that would also help. But as indicated by the green line right at the bottom, it's the system change that we should actually look for, because no one of these different endpoints is really going to get us where we want to be. So the key message then from this Breaking the Plastic Wave study is, with the right level of action, tackling the problem of plastic pollution may be remembered as a success story on the human's ability to rethink and rebuild systems that can sustainably support lives and livelihoods while environment thrives. And that is a quote directly from the report. So we said we are going to apply this in the South African context. So what is this model that we are talking about? It is a data-driven model coupled ordinary differential equation. So that is the type of model that we are working with. Then it calculates the flows of plastics through representative systems. And this is where our headache started, to get the systems diagram correct for South Africa. Then we had to look at the key stocks and flows of land-based sources of plastics pollution across the entire value chain of municipal solid waste, and specifically looking at macroplastics. And I think that's quite important to note, that our modeling is based on the macroplastics. Then the projected growth in demand is calculated using the country-level population, as well as the per capita macroplastics consumption or presence in municipal solid waste. And then the global population was split by the original breaking the plastic waste study into 8 geographic archetypes, of which South Africa is represented by one of those. And we specifically use that one archetype to fill in gaps we didn't have local South African data. So at least that it's the same basis that we used in the international study. Then also, the populations were further differentiated by distance to water, more than 1 kilometer or less than 1 kilometer, and also rural versus urban. Because the assumption is that if people stay within a kilometer from a water resource, that it's more likely that the plastic will end up in the water, and that will be a conduit to the sea. And then there's 3 different material categories that we looked at: rigid monomaterials, flexible monomaterials, and multi-layer or multi-materials. So you can imagine that finding the data on these specific plastic streams were definitely not easy, and therefore we are very thankful to Plastics SA and Annaby Pretorius, who kindly assisted us in obtaining this data. So as I said, applying this model in South Africa is basically to test the model at country level, where we use then the South African data as input. And then we decided to model, for now, 3 different scenarios. The business as usual, applying the extended producer responsibility targets, as is now in law, and then also look at the best feasible scenario going forward by maximizing jobs, looking at reasonable cost, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Because we thought that those are the main things that is currently part of our national government vision going forward. Then we also provide evidence to inform policy direction towards addressing plastics pollution using the 4 levers, which is reduction, substitution, recycling, or proper disposal. So this is just to show you the complexity of this model. This is the systems map that was drawn up, and we had to verify and change this map so that it matches South African conditions. And the big red lines on the slide is basically where the changes were made. But I think it's also important to note that each of the boxes needed a number, and each of the lines, which are the flows, also needed a number. Now, you can imagine that in the South African context, finding those numbers were definitely no easy task. So, as I've already said, we've collected, first of all, industry data, where we used the data from Plastics SA, which was kindly also, and was assisted by Annaby Pretorius, who is, I think everybody in this room knows that she's the lady collecting the data on a regular basis. But still we had challenges. In the South African context, we don't have industry-specific data that is in the format required by the model. It doesn't show all the flows. It doesn't show all the different boxes that we had to come up with. So it really took some time and effort to populate the data into the spreadsheet. Then the recycling rates that are reported in South Africa is typically as a percentage of the plastics collected. And now we were confronted with having to convert that into the percentage of municipal solid waste. And I will get to the solid waste data just now, but that's also no easy task to do. Then imports of products packaged in plastics are also not included in the data that we have currently, so we had to make some assumptions. Furthermore, the data on rigid and flexibles can quite easily be calculated based on the information that we got from industry. But when you start looking at the multi-layers, it's not all that easy because it's also not freely available data. For instance, the Tetra Pak is typically reported as a paper product rather than plastic, but it contains some plastic as well. So that also added to our headache. And then we also have a lack of data, specifically on the split between formally collected and informally collected materials, because nobody reports it, nobody records it. We just know it comes into the system, but it was never before important to know where it actually comes from. And then we also have a total lack of data on open loop recycling. And that is typically the plastics that is no longer going back into a recyclable plastic product, but something like plywood or into a road or something like that, which is still in its infancy in South Africa. We don't have a lot of such recycling happening. So if we then look at municipal data, I've pointed out we had trouble with the industry data, but I think the troubles we had with the solid waste data was even worse. We had the State of Waste report of 2018 as a baseline, and then we know the South African Waste Information System is a regulation requiring municipalities to report on municipal solid waste. But sadly, the reporting into the SAWS is not what is expected. So we again were faced with many challenges. We have poor reporting by municipalities onto the information system. Characterization studies are done at municipal level, but they typically don't go down to the level of the different types of plastics. You will see plastics as one category. And also the methods that are used for those characterization studies are not standardized, so we don't really have comparable data when it comes to that. Then if you look at plastics between the formal collection and the informal collection, just looking at waste that is formally collected is already an issue. We don't have proper data. So when it then comes down to the plastics, again, we had to use some assumptions. And then we also don't have data on the plastics recovery from landfills. And as you can see on the pictures, I wanted to put the pictures there so that you can see what is the situation. The waste either goes to landfill, where there's a lot of pickers, scavenging, taking off some of the plastics in big bags. You can see there at the bottom the lady walking with a bag full of plastics off the landfill. Those are often not recorded. And in addition, we also have poor service delivery in terms of waste. So we still have a lot of waste going up in smoke, people burning that. And the other picture at the bottom is in an area in Johannesburg where the community actually told us they are dumping the waste on the bank of the river in order to try and avoid flooding during the flooding season. So people literally dump into the rivers. So that is then the challenges that we were sitting with. We also had to give some estimates of the available landfill airspace in South Africa, which is also a very good guess, and then the disposal rate of waste into those landfills. So there's a lot of uncertainty still that remains in terms of the data that was required for this model. So we tried our best to fill the gaps. And first of all, the project team went into peer-reviewed literature. And there we were very happy to find a paper that was published by colleagues at UCT, who did an estimate of the municipal solid waste that's not formally collected in tonnages. So there at least we've got some estimates to work with. We also spoken to some local experts, as well as looked at the data that is available in the integrated waste management plans from municipalities to get a sense of the percentage split between the different waste streams or plastic streams in the municipal waste. And where we couldn't find any data, we had to revert back to the archetype data from the global study. But all is not lost. We did manage to run the model. And I must apologize, these slides are still looking very, how can I put it, not well polished. And the reason for this is we didn't run the model to its full potential just because it takes too much time for a presentation like today. But you can see there clearly our business as usual model for just where the waste ends up is the top line is the plastic waste that is generated. And you will see I had a question around the hump that we see quite to the left of the slide. That is 2020. Our model starts at 2016 and runs up till 2040. But in 2020, with the lockdown, we had an increase in wastage, and that is what is depicted there. Then you can see, next up is the waste that's formal, or plastic waste that's formal collected. It looks quite good, at least we know a lot of it is collected. Then we have the plastics that's uncollected. The blue line is the waste that is recycled, and right at the bottom we have the plastic waste that is informally collected. Now, as I say, we still have to confirm these graphs with the people that provided us with input so that we can see if that is correct. But we are fairly comfortable showing this to you at this point in time. We then also looked at the greenhouse gas emissions. And this is something that really bothered us when we started with LCA studies on plastics in the first instance. And that is the greenhouse gas emissions from virgin polymer production is quite high, and it is higher than elsewhere in the world simply because we use coal as the main basis for our plastics. So whenever you start comparing then South African data to other countries, you find this as the big difference. If you look at conversion, the greenhouse gas emissions are not that high. What was also surprising is that the open burning is contributing quite a bit to the greenhouse gas emissions from plastics. And then the last few lines on the graph are just all at the bottom over each other for landfill sorting and so forth, because there's not many greenhouse gas emissions coming from there. But I think the most interesting slide is probably this one, looking at the pollution flows. The top line again is the plastic waste generated, and then the second line is open burning of plastics. And we were quite surprised in a way by this, especially since South Africa is rated 11th with the leakage into the environment. But you can see the aquatic pollution is the blue line right at the bottom. So leakage into the marine environment from South Africa is not that high as everybody anticipated it. Even though we had a lot of uncollected plastic waste, that is the line just below burning, we also have land pollution by plastic, and we have mismanaged plastic. And here I want to interpret the results for you. The leakage into the oceans is lower than what is anticipated, for the simple reason that South Africa is a relatively dry country. We are the 30th dry country in the world. So our rainfall is comparatively low, so people dumping plastics close to rivers, expecting the rivers to take the plastics away, is in for a big surprise. Because it's only when there's big rain events that you really find the rivers flowing and taking away the plastics. Therefore, it's more likely that the plastics are set alight to get rid of it. And also our rivers are mostly non-perennial, especially also when you look at the rest of Africa. So there is not that much river flows into the ocean around South Africa, as is typically expected from a country with such a large coastline. What is also quite significant is there's a significant part of mismanaged plastics that gets burned and goes up in smoke. I wanted to put it that way because of my picture showing the smoke. And the reason for that, or the data for that, came from Stats South Africa. And that is the graph that I've put on this slide. You can see there clearly that quite a significant portion of South Africans do not have a regular waste collection service, and it is 2.4% of the country who does not receive a service and have to dispose of the waste in their own way, and therefore that is where the leakage is happening. Then there's also a significant portion of the waste that's coming from uncollected or mismanaged waste, because we also know that a lot of our landfills are not proper landfills that can go through as engineered landfills. So yes, that was quite significant. Then if you look at the conclusions for this study to date, is certainly applying the plastics to ocean model in the South African context have resulted in improvements in the model. As I said, till yesterday we were still running the model. We've already made about 4 changes to the model in the past month just to get it to give results that make sense. So we are very happy that at least that we can put out as one of the conclusions, that we have managed to do that and get the results. Furthermore, the results will be workshopped with the Technical Advisory Committee or group from this project, just also to make sure that we can refine it if necessary. And I don't know if you are familiar with the term Monte Carlo runs. At the moment, we are testing the model with about 100 of those runs, whereas when we want to get the final results, we would do close to 250, 300 runs, which means it takes a lot longer for a normal computer to do all these different runs and calculates so that we get to a nice graph in the end. But the outputs of this study will then be a technical report as well as a briefing note. And we are also busy setting up a virtual regional science, technology and innovation hub on the CSIR website. And the intention is, once we are done with this project, to then assist other African countries with a need for evidence-based decision-making, to assist them to apply the model also in their context. Although I said to my colleagues, I don't know if we really want to put up our hands for that, because finding data in South Africa was a challenge. I don't know how it's going to go in the rest of Africa. But my colleagues are confident, and they said to me, let's do it. So that is what we are going to do. And with that, thank you very much from my side.